power that ruled over star systems and extraterrestrial civilizations was the Galactic Empire. Its troops, weapons, and technology were the pinnacle of the cosmos, and they were uncontested. Making entire worlds submissive or, if need, exterminated for the Empire, Earth was a tiny, impoverished planet with little inhabitants. Military absurdity, but Earth refused to comply, seeing the Empire's authority as the Emperor, notably Earth's defiance, became impatient if the leaders of the Empire were not aware of the repercussions. No longer merely a small annoyance, but rather an insult to their supreme authority. The Emperor decided that Earth needed to learn a lesson, and that an army would be sent to conquer it. Earth needs something specific. A planet would be overkill and a waste of resources, and ruthless anything that would show off the power of the Empire without he called forth the Void Shadows, which were the Empire's covert weapon. A group of skilled killers whose name alone inspired fear. These were not your typical soldiers. Trained in the Void Shadows' skill at infiltration and silent elimination, had overthrown leaders and the whole resistance networks and used cloaking technologies to disappear from sight. Made them nearly undetectable, equipped with soundless weapons and perfected tactical abilities, were the deadly and invisible manifestation of darkness that the Emperor himself briefed. His voice was as icy as his order departing the Abyss Shadows on their quest. Their orders were straightforward: infiltrate Earth's main defense system. Command to overthrow its rulers and pave the way for the Empire to establish dominance over Earth's. The Emperor told them that this was only a drill and that resistance would disintegrate with its leaders gone. The Void Shadows swiftly created as a reminder of the Empire's might to anybody else who would dare to oppose it, effectively and emotionlessly, reminding them that this was simply another mission. Themselves on a different planet without realizing the impending storm. The squad's leader was an expert. The briefing was calmly led by an assassin who has lead missions on the vastly more evolved planet Earth. He said the information outlining Earth's weakest areas. They talked about Earth's defenses and examined how antiquated they were contrasted with the Empire's sophisticated technology, which they knew Earth lacked defenses that could detect the emptiness, let alone halting them. The Shadows silently chuckled as Earth's at great cost to them. This mission was practically a parody of their skills they were used to breaking into guarded planets where being discovered meant death, while Earth was just a formality, a small diversion. The advanced suits of the Void Shadows enabled them to fit in perfectly with any setting, giving the impression that they are only shadows at night. There was no sign of firearms, no loud explosions, and no frantic firefights. As they got closer to Earth, their tools were as sophisticated as their techniques, and they were proficient in the silent, exact kill. Some of the Void Shadows, who were elite assassins, started to feel a little helpless on their sleek, silent ship. Even though the Empire's finest trained for missions where failure was inevitable, this mission appeared almost straightforward. Regretfully, the Void Shadows rarely came into a universe with such overwhelming odds in their favor. Earth would be brought to its knees because the Emperor had insisted and his orders were never questioned. Leaders have left before sunrise, but the vacant Shadows are unaware of it. A lone man on Earth knew they were coming, but they lacked sophisticated technology, a backup plan, and any mass-producing weaponry. Devastation, but what he had was a skill and discipline that went beyond simple devices or machinery. Training was based on a tradition that had been passed down through the years, which involved moving in total silence while blending in with the body. Without any technology or instruments, this guy had schooled his body and mind to withstand the Shadows and turn invisible. He lacked a squad and allies, making it impossible to predict an enemy's next move and strike with accuracy and speed. Keep an eye on his back. He only required his training and instincts. Given his profound knowledge of stealth, whilst the Void Shadows used technology to become undetectable, for years he was a master of patience and hiding, invisible to nature. Knew that Earth's defiance would eventually draw the Empire's rest path to the abyss, so they prepared for this moment. As they had intended, the Shadows' ship sneaked into Earth's atmosphere. As they moved with deliberate precision and fell silently into the night, they felt invincible and unstable, and they thought they were just an easy target because their outfits made them invisible to everyone. Human eyes and weapons were sharp and ready for rapid killings. Earth had already been overrun, but the silent person concealed in the darkness was. After waiting and observing the patterns and changes in the night sky, he felt that the moment had arrived, so he took action. Softly through the shadows, his body calm, his mind concentrated, ready for he was aware of what was coming, and that he was the only thing protecting Earth from the empty shadows. And he accepted the challenge, demonstrating to the Empire that although Earth may have been undervalued, There was more to this tiny blue world than they had previously recognized. And for the time being, he waited in the dark, his senses sharpened with every action the Empire's most dreaded assassins planned was measured by breath. Approaching, but the emptiness shadows believed they were the hunters, so he would be prepared. Amidst the cacophony of a busy planet that few were aware of, they were about to learn that they were the hunted on Earth. The guardian who guarded it from the shadows was a lone individual without any titles or ranks, just a man he was raised in the ancient traditions and received training that went well beyond what anyone could have imagined. In order to walk through darkness like a phantom and strike without being heard, he had trained under the harshest discipline, honing abilities that only those who have lived their entire lives in the era of invisibility knew how to use. He was the greatest kept secret on Earth. A fighter who had never encountered a foe like the one on the horizon. When the Empire threatened, his instincts had warned him to be ready, so he had prepared for this when it first loomed on the horizon. Moment alone because he felt responsible, not because he had been selected by any authority or council. Outsiders would perceive him as weak, but he knew that power wasn't necessarily found in weaponry, of location, but the technology and might of the Galactic Empire were used by those who were determined to defend it. Most people would have found it ridiculous to attempt to oppose them on one's own, but the Guardian's strength was he moved with patience, accuracy, and flexibility rather than force. A calm assurance that every step he took was deliberate. He lacked armor and weaponry made from, unfortunately, he lacked any technological advancements and instead had a deep comprehension of anticipation's silence and how to employ his environment. The ability of deceiving his adversary was his weapon. The Void is assassinated by the Empire's flaws even before they get on Earth. Shadows received training in sophisticated tactics, covert equipment, and methods that had been refined, and they fought together across galaxies, each having faith in the other's skills and using technology as an extension of themselves. Believing they were unbeatable thanks to technology that rendered them invisible, but the Earth's Guardian was aware that even the most skilled soldiers may become dependent on technology. Dependable and dependent on instruments rather than intuition. As he navigated he made preparations for the impending conflict with clarity, knowing that the Void shadows would show up, anticipating a swift operation aiming to destroy Earth leaders without any problems. They would be ready for opposition, but not from. They had never faced an opponent like him who could blend in with the surroundings so well without the use of technology. But straightforward, well-practiced methods, and he modified his strategy to fit their methods. He was able to visualize their movements and anticipate their patterns, comprehending how they would depend on cloaks, and he knew how to use the stillness with which they would travel, confident that no one would notice them. Their dependence on technology, each of their devices has a counter. He had an answer for each benefit they thought their invisibility would provide, and he would turn their strengths are turned into disadvantages by expectations against them. His advantage was not in strength or speed, but in being aware of his environment and utilizing each rock, tree. He examined the natural terrain and used the shadows in his path as part of his approach. Knew how to walk and comprehended light angles such that his own shadow would never turn on him. When the emptiness shadows relied on artificial cloaking without the aid of gadgets, he just blended in with the darkness, disappearing into it. In the depths of night, Void shadows would arrive with the sole intention of swiftly sweeping through Earth's defenses. They would be ready for army ambushes, military traps, and possibly even automated defenses, yet they weren't ready for him because he wasn't like any soldier they had ever seen. He didn't require any weapons, however. His greatest weapon was his intellect, which had become so focused that he could predict their every move. He was aware that the Void shadows worked as a cohesive team, trusting one another to help them in strength, but he would isolate each assassin, eroding their self-confidence before striking without warning, showing up and vanishing like a ghost. And every interaction would be on his terms in places he had meticulously chosen, where the technological advantages of the Void shadows would be ineffective, despite the fact that he had spent many hours of training. The Guardian was aware that every second of the next encounter would involve adaptation and survival. He would need to combine his instincts to become something the Empire could never predict. Tradition and adaptability from the past and present are things that go beyond their comprehension of conflict and fight. The Void shadows were accustomed to the excitement of hunting and were created by the Empire to be the ideal hunters. Foes from different universes, yet they would encounter an enemy for the first time. He was the predator himself, not the pursued, and he would be everywhere and nowhere, evading capture. He visualized every stage of the task, the timing, and the precision, testing them in a way they had never experienced before. When necessary, he would apply every method he had ever encountered and every lesson he had internalized from years of silent solitude. Training, the Empire believed they understood Earth and that it was straightforward and predictable, but he would demonstrate the night of their arrival drew near as he completed his research. Showing them a side of Earth that was anything but he gave himself a final glimpse of the world he was guarding as he made preparations. Earth wasn't merely a mark to be conquered, it was his home, which is why he had committed to a lifetime of mastery. He walked with a new sense of purpose, bearing the burden of a long-standing tradition, prepared to protect his world from an adversary that thought it was unstoppable. The Empire had dispatched the most lethal assassins in the galaxy, but they were headed to Earth. Had its own secrets, a location with a protector they never would have thought of, and the guardian who waited every. When the empty shadows appeared, every muscle in the body was fine-tuned and ready to demonstrate to them what true dread was. On Earth, each assassin wore a cloak and moved with deliberate, silent movements, using the precision of seasoned hunters, ready for a mission they perceived as regular, since their training had trained them to adjust to whatever situation they could encounter. Any assault and fail to leave any indication of their existence. Earth was but another mission in a lengthy series of planetary eliminations, a straightforward target that scarcely needed their entire skill set. They anticipated a simple infiltration, prompt order fulfillment, and a trouble-free return to the Empire, but almost instantly, something seemed strange. And the silence didn't provide them with the sensation of control they typically felt. That there was an unexpected tension, rather than the simple infiltration they had expected. Their leader sent them a signal in the air to disperse and move closer to the target, a secret command center that they intended to neutralize. They moved with their usual effectiveness, but the assurance they exuded when wearing armor started to feel heavy as they moved forward. Even for a deserted region, it was too quiet. And a peculiar une settled over them, despite the fact that none of their sensors or equipment could detect anything out of the ordinary. When one of the assassins disappeared without warning, the others quickly realized his absence thanks to their keen intuition. They stopped looking at their meticulously planned formation after noticing his lack of movement. Their outfits should have prevented them from being seen by anything else than the most sophisticated tracking devices. But inexplicably, one of their own vanished completely, leaving the group in a state of perplexity. One of their members was now the prey, despite having been educated to be the unseen predators. Their leader gave them a cool, collected order. A search of the immediate neighborhood, but another assassin fell silent before the order could be fully carried out. Unlike any resistance they had, this was gone as swiftly and silently as the first. Experienced before they learned how to combat organized troops, strong defenses, and even guerrilla warfare. However, there was something more going on here that they were unable to comprehend or recognize as being after them. Despite their training, they were unable to anticipate or foresee each assassin and started to feel the jagged edge of fear. They used their advanced sensory equipment, cloaking devices, and technology to keep control over every setting. Yet in this case, nothing was functioning as planned. They had only seen maps and simulations of the Earth's surface, and they had no idea how they believed that quiet and darkness could be used against them the way an enemy could use them as tools. They would be untouchable due to their invisibility, but it now appears to be a flaw that shielded them from. As they continued, their confidence weakened and they grew more cautious in the very world they were attempting to conquer. They tightened their formations with each stride, observing every angle as their nerves taught them every sound. Their instincts, which they hadn't employed in years, stopped when movement became a potential threat. They were no longer the frigid fishing unit who had arrived to Earth anticipating an invasion because of their reliance on technology. Simple mission, they were all becoming into individuals, each isolated by an adversary that moved silently and unseen. After that, one of them vanished, and the others hardly noticed a flicker in the shadows, a momentary shift that might have been a trick of the illumination, but they realized it away that they were dealing with an adversary that was aware of their strategies, could see through their disguise, and knew how to make every kill happen quickly. It was quiet and unwavering, as if their companion had been engulfed by the darkness itself. Nothing behind the group of surviving assassins, and panic was starting to emerge from the gaps in their discipline. Whispered stiff, strained voices among themselves, a sound they had never imagined hearing within their ranks. They were elite, the greatest, and they couldn't combat what they couldn't see, and none of their typical strategies worked. Empire had, but something that didn't fit any recognized profile was tearing them down. The squad leader was having difficulty maintaining something that functioned beyond the Empire's comprehension of warfare. In an attempt to reorganize and reevaluate, Control ordered a tactical retreat. However, another member went down before they could move. And this time the group caught a glimpse of the attacker, a vague shape in the shadows, a figure that moved precisely and fluidly. A brief movement that vanished as soon as it appeared. Wasn't a typical soldier, rather. It was a shadow with a speed and silence that appeared almost supernatural. They realized then that they were up against a foe unlike any they had ever faced, and their confidence had changed. Each assassin into a full-blown panic, their main concern now being survival. Disregarded their leader's orders and abandoned their mission objectives, each heading off in a different route in the hopes the group unity, which had previously been their greatest strength, was able to escape the fate that had befallen their companions. Suddenly destroyed, the emptiness shadows had once dreaded as silent murderers had turned into the hunted, their technology and accuracy in vain against a force that was superior to them, not in terms of technology or firepower, but in a far more eerie ability, patience, and mastery of darkness that made their own instruments useless. They realized in those last seconds that their conceit had been their downfall. Their self-confidence in their superiority had made them oblivious to the well-thought-out strength that was concealed in Earth's shadows while the surviving killers attempted to escape. They came to the realization that their advanced weapons, invisibility, and technology were nothing in comparison to an adversary who could blend in with the surroundings without the use of technology and who understood how to use silence as a weapon. They had arrived on Earth anticipating a simple mission. But they were departing with the sobering knowledge that they had undervalued this world and its inhabitants, disappearing one by one into the at-night. A silent figure who is a master of shadows, who even annihilates void shadows, does so with unwavering precision. Couldn't see that towards the end, nobody was left to recount what had transpired. Only the silent, desolate darkness has returned to tranquility, as if nothing had disturbed it completely. Shadows were renowned for their accuracy and cunning, and their crew was among the most well-behaved units in the galaxy. But now they are stuck in a game that they didn't realize that Earth's invisible defender had broken up their formation, dividing them one by one and removing all feeling of. The assassins, who had previously been educated to function as a single, flawless organism, were now segregated and compelled to act. Each of them was aware that they were the prey, since they were individuals in a foreign place. Vulnerable and unable to identify each assassin on their own, they had to adapt by depending on long suppressed by years of reliance on technology. Their instincts moved with hyper-awareness, looking for any indication of the enemy, who had previously captured several of their own cloaking devices, which are often infallible, appeared to the shadows they had relied on to hide them, felt like hostile forces in this setting, making them useless. Their senses were sharpened to identify advanced threats that lurked just out of sight. Were useless against a foe who blended in with his surroundings so well that he appeared to become the silence, which was a feature of the environment itself, was unsettling because it was used to regulating the environment, using lights and noises to their advantage. The assassins now discovered that these components were working against them. Rather than covering each assassin, the darkness concealed their adversary. Split off and cautiously attempted to get to a place where they could restore some control, but every step they experienced a new surge of anxiety as they moved forward, feeling pulled more into a labyrinth of shadows within these remote locations, with no way out. They tried to signal each other, others attempting to reorganize, but their efforts were thwarted and misrepresented, as even though the air itself was against them, the void shadows were used to their equipment operating without a hitch. Realized gradually that their communication tactics were ineffective in this situation. Typically, their leader's voice was one of calm and order, couldn't provide any comfort. His commands were answered with silence. And he was battling the growing concern that the enemy wasn't use physical force or obvious pitfalls, but instead he undermined their unity and confidence. One assassin was methodically psychologically dismantled by ordinary resistance, away from the others, and attempted to find anything that could provide a hint using his sophisticated scanning equipment to the enemy's location. But while he remained there, his senses became more acute, and he understood that he saw movement and realized the horrifying truth that the hunter was already there, only to be surpassed in a matter of seconds, and his final thought was one of shock that he had never faced an adversary that could move so silently and fluidly with each disappearance. The remaining assassins were even more terrified that their well-planned mission was falling apart, not because overwhelming force, but they were unable to predict their opponent's movements or the manner in which he would attack because they didn't know where he was. Before they took that exact step, his movements and every stride felt like they were entering a trap that didn't exist. Their high-tech equipment and assassination talents all seemed pointless in this situation. In a game where the rules they had previously relied on were altered to take advantage of each and every flaw, the leader was now walking by himself when he felt his heart beat loud in his ears and his breath quicken. Never had to deal with the breakdown of all reason and authority, he recalled. The training and discipline were instilled in them from day one, and fear had no place in their thoughts or control over their will. But the commander recognized that this adversary had stolen their training and their advantages and used them against them. It was too late for them to realize that their own conceit had rendered them blind. Earth's defender lacked superior technology, but he was erratic and was giving them a sense of fear that they had previously believed to be unattainable. Every stride they took forward turned into a hesitancy, and every look was an attempt to see the shadow that followed them. A hunter with patience who didn't have to hurry, the assassin's masters of a quick, clinical approach put them up against a foe who could prolong every second so that it felt like our own. As the adversary moved them more apart, their attempts to reassemble and strategize only served to further isolate them. Destroying their solidarity and exposing them one by one, they each fell. Assassins suffering the same destiny, their abilities rendered ineffective against a foe who knew the true meaning of terror. As endurance as every Void Shadows member was destroyed, the truth of their predicament became evident. They had not only been outmatched, but they had also made the error of underestimating Earth. Would not survive to lament the fact that the final member of his team had to face the consequences of his failure, since he had thought that technology strategies their training rendered them invincible, yet on a planet where they had ridiculed his squad, who had been destroyed by a single individual who understood the power of invisibility and the Phi. He understood the art of waiting as he stood by himself and saw that this defender was not only physically destroying them, but also shattering their determination and removing the very identity that rendered them shadow-free. He was aware of the weight of that silent presence and the icy, uncompromising precision with which his crew had been disassembled. This was no typical adversary, rather. It was a master who had researched them and was more familiar with their tendencies and vulnerabilities. The leader of the Void Shadows realized in his last moments that they were aware of the terrain they had landed on. The Emperor had overlooked the fact that Earth was not helpless or straightforward. Buried a guardian whose abilities were incomprehensible to the Empire and who didn't require sophisticated technology to outmaneuver them, and when the leader collapsed, he realized how seriously flawed their strategy was. Presumed supremacy based on tools and viewed Earth as weak as they had measured it by their own criteria, and weapons, overlooking the fact that real mastery was about understanding oneself and one's adversary and exploiting every situation as an ally. The Earth's defender remained silent and invisible to the Empire's gaze after the last of the Void Shadows had vanished. Greatest had been destroyed by a power they couldn't comprehend or overcome. The mission was finished, and Earth was still in their last moments. The emptiness shadows remained untouchable and protected by the same presence that had been there the entire time. Had discovered a fact they were unable to disclose often. The most deadly adversary is the one who fights in silence with unfathomable strength. The silent darkness restored its tranquility. Leaving no evidence of the battle that had occurred was evidence of the strength of an invisible, unwavering guardian who was the last. Shadow stood in emptiness, his head racing and all his senses enhanced. He was the commander with experience in command and survival gained from innumerable missions, but suddenly he found himself overcome with a strange sense of uncertainty as he observed his top team performing the best. The Empire's assassins had been eliminated one by one, and each defeat had worn down his self-assurance, revealed weaknesses he was unaware. He had never anticipated that this Earth mission would be straightforward, but it had become a nightmare. And he attempted to manage he reminded himself that terror had no place in his head as he breathed to relax. Was an adversary he had vanquished in the past, but it was now infiltrating with each movement in the shadows. He couldn't get rid of the sensation that something just out of his reach was watching and tracking him. He felt his heart thumping relentlessly and silently, something he hadn't. Since the beginning of his preparation, this mission had deprived him of his invincibility, leaving him vulnerable. He examined what he knew about his adversary out of vulnerability and desperation. This wasn't some naive resistance. This was a strategic foe with a well-thought-out plan who saw silence as a weapon and terror as a tool. The shadow he faced was a patient master who didn't require technology or obvious power. Exploit the slightest errors, it became evident that this was not an adversary. Could easily outmaneuver or outpower him, he would need to outthink him to figure out a method. He moved carefully, assessing his surroundings with each step in an attempt to regain control. Surrounds. The adversary had destroyed his team with a degree of accuracy he didn't believe was conceivable. It seemed as though the voided shadow, who could read their thoughts and predict every move, could instantly counter it. The leader realized that he couldn't depend on his standard techniques and strategies. He had never seen a combat like this before, therefore he would have to quickly adjust to identify any weaknesses where he could, but every time he sought to elicit a response from his opponent, he was met with silence. Putting traps, altering his course, and testing his theories, nothing worked, he discovered. Himself circling around, unable to shake the sensation that he was being controlled and harmed, he realized that his adversary was actively directing his movements in addition to anticipating them. He was playing a game where he was only a piece on the board, and the silence that surrounded him made him feel even more alone. For the first time in a long time, he felt his muscles tense and his breath rapid and shallow. His profession, he was no longer the hunter, but rather the victim caught in a strange. He was burdened by the demands of the Empire in a world where every shadow was a threat from an invisible enemy. He had come here to subjugate and bring the planet to its knees, but now he tried to muster his determination while fighting for his life, using all of the lessons he had learned, but his adversary had. Controlling the Void Shadow Leader was something he had mastered in addition to stealth. Every second passed without him being able to establish any kind of foothold or locate a single location where he felt even slightly secure. Time becoming a hardship when he saw that he was totally outclassed as a last resort, he used all of his remaining energy to steel himself for a last confrontation. He had before fought against overpowering opponents and survived despite inconceivable odds, but as he stabilized himself, he sensed a silent yet horrifyingly moving presence. He strained to glimpse it through the shadows, close but untouchable. To comprehend, but all he could sense was a blank, unforgiving darkness that swallowed up every effort he made to defend himself. In those last minutes, he recognized his opponent's genuine character. This force was inexplicable. It was neither only a fighter nor a guardian of the planet. A character who experienced the emptiness shadows had depended on and worked beyond the parameters of his training, on strategies and technologies that make them invisible and unbeatable. But none of it mattered against this opponent. His opponent was something completely different. Personification of precision-honed silence that is so imperceptible, realized the power of dread and patience in addition to battle, and the emptiness shadow leader recognized his own shortcomings. His mission had never focused on Earth's advantages or disadvantages, but rather on his own. He had arrived on this planet with assurance and trust in his superiority, thinking that Earth would collapse like so many others had. But he suddenly realized that the adversary was in front of him was more than just a fighter. He was the pinnacle of all the discipline that the Void Shadows had attempted to master. Concentration and mastery of the invisible. As his final thoughts dwindled, he acknowledged the unavoidably. His opponent had triumphed via the Empire's mastery of an art rather than by brute force or overwhelming power. Had failed to see that something beyond technology or weapons had vanquished the Shadow Leader. Defeated by someone who knew what real skill was all about. With his fall, there would be no report or word of the Empire's failure until the last thread of their existence on Earth was cut off. Warning to anyone who would arrive after the mission had concluded in silence, just as it had started, leaving Earth unaltered and protected by a guard whose strength came from his unwavering commitment to his cause. The Empire in its conceit had failed to recognize the one fact that some conflicts are won not by force or technology but rather by a dedication to transcendental mastery, and as the silence returned, the silent figure who had protected Earth vanished back into the shadows. An invisible guardian whose triumph didn't require any witnesses from the best of the Empire arrived and went, leaving nothing but a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is not readily apparent. The one that waits in silence is power. Earth stayed unaltered, and its guardian came back to. Unseen and unwavering, his vigil is prepared for whatever may come next.